Commander Vexera's crystalline antennae flickered with barely contained frustration as she studied the combat simulation results displayed across her office's holographic interface. The numbers didn't lie. The Galactic Defense Academy's performance metrics had been declining steadily for the past 3 cycles, and now they had reached a critical point. The towering Centaurian officer rose from her desk, her iridescent scales catching the light of the twin suns that illuminated the Academy's orbital station. Behind her, the massive viewing window offered a spectacular view of the swirling gas giant Helios Prime, but she barely noticed it anymore. Her mind was consumed by the challenge before her. "Display candidate pool, current cycle," she commanded. The holographic display shifted, showing hundreds of profiles from across the known galaxy. Species from every major space-faring civilization were represented: the stoic Araxians with their silicon-based biology, the hyper-intelligent Novan Collective, even a handful of the rare energy-based ethereals. But something was missing. A chime announced the arrival of High Administrator Tal, his massive frame barely fitting through the doorway. The draconid scales were showing signs of age, turning from their original obsidian black to a distinguished gray. "The Council has reviewed your proposal, Commander," Tal rumbled, his voice like distant thunder. "They find it controversial." Vexera's antennae twitched. "With respect, Administrator, we're running out of options. The traditional methods aren't working anymore. The threats we face are evolving faster than our training can adapt." "And you believe humans are the answer?" Tal's voice carried a note of skepticism that bordered on derision. "They're barely out of their gravity well. Most of their population doesn't even know we exist." "That's exactly why we need them," Vexera insisted, pulling up new data streams. "Look at their military history, their tactical innovations. They've achieved more technological progress in the past century than most species manage in a millennium. They're unpredictable, adaptable." "Dangerous," Tal interrupted. "Unstable. Their planet is still divided into competing nations. They wage war against themselves for resources they could easily share. And yet they survive. They thrive." Vexera projected a new image, a human female's profile. Sarah Chun, 26 planetary cycles old. Former tactical instructor in something called Special Forces. Her psychological profile shows exactly the kind of adaptability we need. Tal studied the image, his ancient eyes narrowing. "The Council has approved a trial run. 1 human. 1 cycle. If this fails, Commander, it will be the end of your career. If we don't try something new, Administrator, there won't be any careers to worry about. The swarm is expanding again, and our current graduates aren't ready." After Tal left, Vexera spent hours reviewing Sarah Chen's file. The human had an impressive record of unconventional solutions to seemingly impossible scenarios. But what caught Vexera's attention were the notes from her commanding officers: "Shows exceptional ability to adapt to changing circumstances and demonstrates unusual capacity for lateral thinking." The next morning, as Sarah Chen's transport docked with the Academy station, whispers already raced through the halls. Students from a dozen species gathered to catch a glimpse of the human, their curiosity mixed with undisguised disdain. The Arisian combat instructor, Sarah Van, made no attempt to hide his disapproval. A primitive species with bones of calcium and muscles of protein, he chittered to his colleagues. "They'll break in their first high-gravity exercise." The docking bay door cycled open, and Sarah Chen stepped through. She was shorter than most of the gathered aliens, her dark hair pulled back in a neat bun, her posture military straight. Her eyes scanned the room with quick, efficient movements, taking in details that most would miss. Vexera noticed how the human's gaze lingered for just a fraction of a second on the emergency exits, the security stations, the defensive emplacements disguised as architectural features. "Welcome to the Galactic Defense Academy, Instructor Chin," Vexera said, stepping forward. "I am Commander Vexera, Chief of Combat Training." Sarah saluted crisply. "Thank you for the opportunity, Commander. I understand I'm something of an experiment." A ripple of surprised murmurs ran through the crowd. Most species required at least a week to adapt to the Universal Translator's neural interface. This human was already speaking fluently. "Follow me," Vexera said, leading Sarah away from the curious onlookers. Your first class begins in 2 hours. I should warn you, many here believe this experiment is doomed to failure. Sarah's lips curved in what Vexera recognized from her cultural studies as a smile. Good thing humans have a long history of proving people wrong. They reached the combat simulation chamber, a massive room that could reconfigure itself to represent any battlefield in the known galaxy. Sarah studied the control interface with intense interest. Your first class will be basic tactical response, Vexera explained. You'll be training a mixed group of junior cadets in. An alarm cut through the air, its pitch rising rapidly. Red emergency lights began pulsing along the corridors. Training accident in Chamber 3, a computerized voice announced. Multiple casualties imminent. Medical teams en route. Without hesitation, Sarah sprinted toward the emergency, Vexera close behind. They found chaos. A gravity plate malfunction had created a crushing 12G zone in the middle of a training exercise. 3 cadets were trapped in the field, their environmental suits failing under the pressure. The medical teams were minutes away. The safety systems weren't responding. The trapped cadets had seconds at most. Sarah's eyes darted around the room, taking in the scene. She spotted a maintenance panel, ripped it open, and began pulling out fiber optic cables. What are you doing? Vexera demanded. The gravity field is channeled through these conduits, Sarah explained, her hands moving with practiced efficiency. If I can create a feedback loop, she twisted 2 cables together, causing a shower of sparks. The crushing gravity field fluctuated, then collapsed. The trapped cadets fell to the floor, gasping but alive. As medical teams rushed in, Vexera stared at the human with new appreciation. How did you know that would work? She asked. I didn't, Sarah admitted. But in high-pressure situations, sometimes you have to trust your instincts and try something new. Better than doing nothing and watching people die. Vexera's antennae quivered with understanding. This was exactly why they needed humans. In that moment of crisis, Sarah hadn't frozen. She hadn't waited for orders or consulted protocols. She had assessed, adapted, and acted. As they walked back to prepare for Sarah's first official class, Vexera noticed the looks from passing students and instructors had changed. There was still skepticism, yes, but now there was also curiosity, interest, maybe even a touch of respect. Your file mentioned you specialized in impossible scenarios, Vexera said. I think you'll find plenty of those here. Sarah nodded, her expression determined. Good. In my experience, Commander, impossible just means no one's found the right approach yet. Looking at the human's confident stride, Vexera felt something she hadn't experienced in a long time, hope. Maybe, just maybe, this experiment wasn't so impossible after all. The combat simulation chamber hummed with energy as Sarah Chun faced her first class of cadets. 20 pairs of eyes, some multifaceted, some bioluminescent, some barely recognizable as eyes at all, stared back at her with varying degrees of curiosity and skepticism. At the back of the group, a towering Draconid cadet named Kothor made no attempt to hide his disdain. His obsidian scales marked him as a member of the elite warrior caste, and his service record showed top marks in every traditional combat discipline. Today's scenario, Sarah announced, her voice clear and confident, is survival in hostile territory with minimal resources. The standard approach involves establishing a defensive position and waiting for extraction. Kothor's serpentine lips curled into a smirk. This was basic training, something every cadet had mastered in their first cycle. We're not going to do that, Sarah continued, bringing up a holographic map of the training zone. Instead, you're going to learn how humans survive when everything goes wrong. The chamber transformed around them, creating a harsh landscape of twisted metal and rubble. The simulated environment was based on an actual battlefield, the ruins of a space station that had been torn apart by gravitational forces. Your environmental suits are damaged, Sarah explained. Communications are down. The atmosphere is leaking away. And somewhere in this wreckage, there's a functional escape pod. You have 30 minutes before life support fails completely. Kothor raised his scaled hand. Instructor, this is impossible. The calculated survival rate for this scenario is 0%. even assuming perfect execution of all standard protocols. Standard protocols will get you killed, Sarah interrupted. That's the point. Sometimes survival means breaking the rules you've been taught. She divided them into teams of 4, deliberately mixing species with different physical capabilities. Cathor found himself grouped with a zero-gravity adapted Novan, an energy-based ethereal, and a silicon-based Arisen. Begin, Sarah commanded, and chaos erupted. Most teams immediately fell back on their training, attempting to establish secure positions and assess their resources. Cathor's team did the same, the Draconid automatically taking command as the highest-ranked cadet. Standard search pattern, he ordered. Will methodically. Look, the Novan interrupted, their crystalline form shimmering with excitement. The human instructor isn't watching us. She's building something? Indeed, Sarah had gathered pieces of debris and was rapidly assembling them into what appeared to be a crude device. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, turning seemingly useless scraps into something purposeful. Observe and learn, she called out, never pausing in her work. Everything around you is a potential tool. Everything you've been taught is a guideline, not a law. Cathor watched in growing frustration as their methodical search yielded nothing. 15 minutes had passed, and the simulated atmosphere was noticeably thinning. His team's advantages, his strength, the Novan's zero-G expertise, the Ethereal's energy manipulation, the Araxian's analytical mind, meant nothing if they couldn't find the escape pod. Then he noticed something strange. The human instructor's improvised device was creating small disturbances in the debris field. She was using it as a makeshift sensor, detecting air currents that would be drawn toward the leak in the escape pod's hatch. Stop, Cathor commanded his team. We're thinking like soldiers. We need to think like survivors. The words felt strange in his mouth, but he pressed on. Ethereal, can you sense energy patterns in the wreckage? The glowing being pulsed with understanding. Yes, there's a power source, but it's scattered, reflected. The metal is interfering with my perception. Novan, in zero-G, how does air move through a damaged structure? The crystalline being's facets sparkled. It follows paths of least resistance, creating microcurrents that. Eris Yen, Cathor interrupted, his mind racing with new possibilities. Your silicon matrix can detect temperature variations, correct? Affirmative, the Arisen chittered. And any functioning escape pod would generate thermal signatures different from the surrounding debris. Cathor felt something he'd never experienced in training before, the thrill of breaking free from practiced forms and memorized responses. New plan. We work together, combining our abilities in ways they weren't designed for. Like humans do. They moved through the wreckage in a new formation. The ethereal projected energy in pulses, which the Novan's crystalline structure refracted, creating a makeshift scanning grid. The Eris Yen processed the thermal data, while Cathor's strength cleared paths through the debris. With 2 minutes remaining on the clock, they found it, the escape pod, cleverly hidden in a pocket of twisted metal that had masked its energy signature. As the simulation faded away, Sarah approached Cathor's team with an approving nod. Congratulations. You're the only team that succeeded. We broke every protocol, Cathor admitted, his voice a mix of pride and confusion. You adapted, Sarah corrected. You saw what wasn't working, and instead of clinging to your training, you changed your approach. That's how humans have survived everything our world has thrown at us. That's what I'm here to teach you. Later, in the observation room, Commander Vexera reviewed the training footage with growing excitement. Remarkable, she said. They're already beginning to think differently. Sarah nodded. Cathor was the surprise. I expected him to resist the hardest, but once he let go of his preconceptions, his natural leadership abilities flourished in a new way. The Council will want results they can quantify, Vexera warned. Then we'll give them something they can't ignore, Sarah replied, pulling up the training schedule. Tomorrow, we break more than just protocols. Tomorrow, we start breaking records. As she left the observation room, Sarah passed Cathor in the corridor. The Draconid cadet straightened to attention, then hesitated. Instructor, he said, I had always believed that humans' lack of natural advantages made them weak. I was wrong. You're Adaptability is an advantage we never considered. Sarah smiled. That's the first lesson, Cathor. The most dangerous assumption in combat is believing you know all your enemy's capabilities, or all of your own. The Galactic Defense Academy's mess hall buzzed with unusual energy. Where species once sat segregated by their biological needs and cultural preferences, new groups had begun to form. Cathor found himself sharing a table with his unlikely training team, watching in fascination as Sarah Chin demonstrated an ancient human tradition called making paper airplanes. The principles of aerodynamics, she explained, folding a synthetic sheet with precise movements, were discovered by humans long before we achieved powered flight. Sometimes the simplest solutions are the most elegant. The ethereal member of their team, now called Spark by their squad mates, pulsed with curiosity as the paper dart sailed through the air in a perfect arc. But how did your species even think to try? Without the inherited knowledge of atmospheric manipulation that my kind possesses. Humans excel at asking, "What if?" Sarah replied, but her attention was suddenly drawn to a commotion at the far end of the hall. A group of senior cadets surrounded a junior Novan student, their postures aggressive. The crystalline being's facets had dulled with distress, their usual shimmer reduced to a worried flicker. Before any instructor could intervene, Sarah was already moving. She approached the group not with authority, but with disarming casualness. "Perfect timing," she said, making everyone pause. "I need volunteers for a new training exercise. Something challenging enough for senior cadets." The ringleader, a massive Arisen named Vextor, turned to face her. "With respect, instructor, this is a private matter." "Nothing in this academy is private," Sarah replied, her tone still light but her eyes hard as steel. "Especially not when it involves the kind of teamwork I've been seeing, or the lack of it." The tension in the air shifted. The senior cadets had heard about the human instructor's unconventional methods, about the impossible scenarios her students somehow survived. "What kind of exercise?" Vextor asked, curiosity overtaking his hostility. Sarah smiled, but Cathor recognized it as the same expression she wore before introducing particularly devious training scenarios. "Report to Chamber 7 in 1 hour. Bring your environmental suits." And she glanced at the Novan student. Every team needs a zero-G specialist. Later, in the training chamber, Sarah's trap was sprung. The senior cadets found themselves facing a scenario that required cooperation between different species' abilities. The Novan's natural affinity for zero-G movement proved essential for navigation, while the others' strengths were tested in unexpected ways. Humans, Sarah explained as they struggled through the course, learned early that survival often depends on protecting those who seem weakest. Every species, every individual, has hidden strengths. The trick is creating conditions where those strengths become advantages. Cathor watched from the observation deck with Commander Vexera, noting how the senior cadet's initial disdain for the Novan student transformed into respect as the exercise progressed. "She's changing more than just our training methods," Vexera observed, her crystalline antennae flickering thoughtfully. "She's changing how we think about strength itself." But not everyone welcomed these changes. In the Academy's secure archives, a shadowy figure accessed classified files, focusing particularly on Sarah Chen's personnel records. The figure's movements were swift, practiced, someone with high-level clearance and intimate knowledge of the Academy's systems. The next morning, Sarah found her training simulations had been altered. What should have been a standard exercise turned lethal as safety protocols failed and emergency shutoffs malfunctioned. Only quick thinking and human instinct for danger saved her students from serious injury. "This wasn't a random malfunction," she told Cathor later, as they examined the corrupted program code. "Someone's trying to discredit the human training program, or worse." The Draconid scales rippled with concern. "But who would have the authority and expertise to bypass security measures?" "That's what we need to find out," Sarah replied, her mind already formulating plans. "And we'll do it the human way, by breaking a few rules and trusting our instincts." She assembled a small team, Cathor, Spark, and their Arisian squad mate Silicon, for a covert investigation. Using skills that definitely weren't part of the official curriculum, Sarah taught them human techniques of infiltration and information gathering. Your species has developed fascinating methods of subterfuge, Silicon observed as they planted passive scanning devices throughout the Academy's computer network. When you're not the strongest or fastest, Sarah explained, you learn to be clever. Humans turned deception into an art form long before we reached the stars. Their investigations soon revealed disturbing patterns. Training accidents had increased across all departments, but particularly in programs that had adopted human-inspired methods. Resource allocations had been quietly shifted, weakening crucial defense systems. And encrypted communications suggested someone was feeding information to forces outside the Academy. The swarm, Cathor growled, examining the partial decryptions. Someone's helping them prepare for an attack. Sarah nodded grimly. And they're using the controversy over human training methods as cover for their real agenda. The question is, how high does this conspiracy go? As if in answer, the Academy's lights flickered, and a new alert echoed through the corridors, security breach in primary defense grid. All command staff report to emergency stations. Sarah exchanged looks with her team. Remember what I taught you about human hunting techniques? How we tracked prey by following patterns, anticipating behavior. They nodded, understanding dawning in their diverse features. Good, Sarah said, checking the charge on her sidearm. Because now we're not just instructors and students. We're hunters. And someone in this academy is about to learn why humans are considered the galaxy's apex predators. The emergency lighting cast crimson shadows through the Academy's corridors as Sarah Chun and her improvised team moved silently through the maintenance tunnels. Cathor's infrared vision led the way, while Spark's energy form provided just enough illumination for the others to navigate. The defense grid sabotage is a diversion, Sarah whispered, her hand trailing along the wall as she recalled the station's layout. In human military history, the most successful infiltrators often created chaos to mask their true objectives. Silicon's crystalline structure vibrated with concern. The quantum data core. If the defense grid is down, the core's security protocols would default to basic settings. Exactly, Sarah nodded. And what better time to access classified files than during an emergency when all command staff are occupied elsewhere? They reached a junction where the maintenance tunnel intersected with the main corridor leading to the quantum data core. Sarah held up her hand, signaling the team to stop. Years of human combat experience told her something wasn't right. Too quiet, she murmured. Where are the emergency response teams? Cathor's scales rippled with understanding. Someone with high-level authority must have redirected them. Sarah pulled out a small device she'd assembled from spare parts, a crude but effective sensor that could detect energy patterns typical of active security systems. It was the kind of improvised technology that humans had always excelled at creating. Multiple laser grids ahead, she reported. Not emergency protocols, these are military grade. Someone's serious about keeping people away from that data core. Spark pulsed thoughtfully. I could phase through the security grid, but the others. We do this together, Sarah insisted. Human history is full of stories about heroes who tried to go alone and failed. It's teams that change the course of events. She reached into her pack and removed what looked like ordinary cleaning supplies, common materials she'd gathered from various parts of the station. Her teammates watched in fascination as she began mixing them together. Silicon, your crystalline matrix can refract energy, right? Sarah asked while working. And Cathor, your scales can absorb significant amounts of thermal radiation? Both cadets nodded, beginning to understand her plan. One of humanity's greatest strengths, Sarah explained as she finished her mixture, is our ability to see new uses for ordinary things. This compound will create a brief electromagnetic pulse when it reacts with silicon's refracted energy. Meanwhile, Cathor's thermal absorption will prevent the security systems from detecting our heat signatures. The plan worked perfectly. The makeshift EMP created a momentary blind spot in the security grid, just long enough for them to slip through. But what they found in the quantum data core chamber stopped them cold. High Administrator Tall stood at the main console, his massive draconid frame illuminated by streams of data flowing through the holographic interface. But he wasn't alone. Next to him stood Saravan, the Narration combat instructor who had been most vocal in opposing human training methods. It's not just about the humans, Tal was saying. The entire academy has grown soft. The swarm grows stronger while we waste time on cooperation and understanding. They need to be shown true strength. Sarah signaled her team to hold position as she recorded the conversation with her data pad. The evidence was damning. Tal and Saravan had been systematically weakening the Academy's defenses while feeding information to the swarm, believing that only a devastating attack would convince the Council to return to more aggressive, traditional training methods. The swarm attack will solve everything, Saravan chittered. Once they breach the outer defenses. They already have, Sarah announced, stepping into view with her weapon drawn. But not in the way you planned. Tal spun around, his scales darkening with rage. Chen, I should have known a human would interfere. That's the problem with your species, Sarah replied calmly. You see our interference as a weakness. But humans? We call it adaptation. Innovation. Survival. The High Administrator lunged for a control panel, but Silicon was faster, their crystalline form extending to block his access. Spark phased through another console, disrupting its circuits, while Kothor moved to cut off Saravan's escape route. Your security forces won't come, Sarah continued. We leaked false emergency protocols through the system. Another human trick, using your own procedures against you. You understand nothing, Tal snarled. The swarm respects only strength, only dominance. Your human methods of cooperation make us weak. Sarah's smile was cold. Really? Because from where I stand, it looks like 4 different species working together just outsmarted the 2 of you. Humans learned long ago that true strength isn't about dominance, it's about turning differences into advantages. Suddenly, the station's real emergency alerts began blaring. Commander Vexera's voice echoed through the communication system, multiple swarm signatures detected on approach. This is not a drill. All personnel to battle stations. Sarah's blood ran cold as she realized the truth. You didn't just feed them information, she said to Tal. You gave them control of our defense systems. The High Administrator's savage grin confirmed her worst fears. The swarm will cleanse this academy of weakness. And there's nothing you can do to stop it. Sarah shared a look with her team, seeing in their alien features the same determination she felt. Actually, she said, her mind already racing with possibilities, you just gave us exactly what we needed, a chance to show you how humans fight when everything is on the line. The Galactic Defense Academy's command center erupted into chaos as the first wave of swarm ships emerged from hyperspace. The crystalline vessels moved with their characteristic hive mind precision, their organic metallic hulls gleaming with malevolent purpose. Sarah Chun stood at the tactical display, her mind racing as she assessed the situation. Behind her, Tal and Saravan were secured by Academy security forces, but the damage was already done. The station's primary defense grid was compromised, and the swarm had intimate knowledge of their standard protocols. Commander Vexera's antennae flickered with barely contained anxiety. Standard response would be to activate our shield matrix and launch a coordinated fighter defense. Which is exactly what they're expecting, Sarah replied, her eyes never leaving the tactical display. Tell me, Commander, what do you know about ancient human naval warfare? Earth's oceanic battles? Vexera looked confused. What relevance could primitive water combat have to this situation? Sarah's lips curved into a smile. Humans learned long ago that when facing a superior force, conventional tactics mean death. We need to change the rules of engagement. She turned to her team. Kothor, what's the one thing the swarm always does in battle? The Draconid cadet's eyes widened with understanding. They adapt to their opponent's patterns, using their hive mind to counter any strategy. Exactly, Sarah nodded. So we give them no pattern to adapt to. Silicon, your people's history includes mining in asteroid fields, correct? The Araxians' crystalline structure brightened. Yes, we developed specialized techniques for navigating dense debris fields. And Spark, Sarah continued, your energy form can interface directly with our ship's systems? The ethereal pulsed with affirmation. I can enhance their maneuverability beyond normal specifications. Sarah turned back to Commander Vexera. I need command authority over all Academy training vessels. And I need every cadet who's been through my program. The commander hesitated only a moment before nodding. Granted. But what exactly are you planning? We're going to teach the swarm about chaos theory, Sarah replied, already typing commands into the tactical console. Cathor, get our people into the simulators. Silicon, I need you to calculate precise debris field trajectories. Spark, start interfacing with our ship's energy distribution systems. Within minutes, the Academy's training fleet launched, but not in the usual tight formations. Instead, the ship scattered in seemingly random patterns, each piloted by a cadet trained in Sarah's unconventional methods. The swarm's first wave hesitated, their hive minds struggling to identify a coherent strategy to counter. Now, Sarah commanded, show them what humans mean by controlled chaos. The Academy ships began executing maneuvers that defied conventional space combat doctrine. They used the station's artificial gravity wells to perform slingshot attacks, each ship following its own unpredictable course. Silicon's debris field calculations created corridors of destruction that only the Academy ships, guided by their enhanced systems, could navigate. The swarm attempted to adapt, but every time they identified a pattern, the defenders would shift tactics completely. One moment they were using classical human guerrilla warfare techniques, the next they were employing ancient naval strategies translated into three-dimensional space combat. Look at their formation, Cathor observed with growing excitement. The hive mind is struggling to maintain cohesion. They can't predict what we'll do next because even we don't know until we do it. Sarah nodded grimly. Humans learned warfare through millions of individual minds working independently, each finding their own solutions. The swarm's greatest strength, their unified consciousness, becomes their weakness when faced with true randomness. Commander Vexera watched in amazement as the tide of battle turned. The swarm's crystalline ships, so elegant in their usual coordinated attacks, began to break formation, their responses becoming increasingly erratic as they failed to establish effective counters to the human-inspired tactics. Second wave incoming, an officer announced, but Sarah was already moving to the next phase of her plan. Spark, now, she commanded. The ethereal being surged through the Academy's power systems, temporarily overclocking their weapon capacitors beyond safe limits, another risky human tactic that prioritized immediate survival over long-term consequences. The resulting barrage caught the second wave of swarm ships as they emerged from hyperspace, their formation already disrupted by the chaos of the ongoing battle. Ships that had evolved to counter traditional energy weapons found themselves overwhelmed by the unconventional power signatures of the overcharged Academy weapons. They're retreating, Cathor announced, his voice filled with disbelief and triumph. The swarm is actually retreating. Sarah allowed herself a small smile, but her expression remained focused. The battle's won, but the war isn't over. The swarm will adapt to these tactics eventually. That's why humans never stop innovating, never stop finding new ways to survive. Commander Vexera approached Sarah as the last swarm ships disappeared into hyperspace. The Council will want an explanation for all of this. We violated dozens of combat protocols, pushed our systems far beyond authorized parameters. Tell them, Sarah replied, that today they witnessed the true power of human combat doctrine. Not in our technology, not in our physical capabilities, but in our fundamental understanding that survival sometimes means breaking every rule you've ever learned. She turned to her team, Cathor, Silicon, and Spark, seeing in their alien features the same fire, the same understanding that had driven humanity from stone tools to the stars. This, she continued, is why humans train the way we do. Because in real combat, in real survival situations, victory doesn't go to the strongest or the most advanced. It goes to those who can adapt, improvise, and overcome. The Academy's emergency lights finally dimmed as systems returned to normal operation, but something had changed forever in the hearts and minds of those who had witnessed the battle. They had seen what human chaos theory could do against overwhelming odds, and they would never look at combat the same way again. The Galactic Council chamber buzzed with tension as representatives from across known space gathered to discuss the unprecedented events at the Defense Academy. Holographic displays showed footage of the battle, with particular focus on the unorthodox tactics that had driven back the swarm. Saracen stood before them, her posture military straight but relaxed, flanked by Commander Vexera and her team. The contrast was striking. A human, a centaurian, a draconid, an Arisian, and an ethereal, standing together as equals. What you are proposing, the Novan Council leader's crystalline form shimmered with concern, is a complete reorganization of our defense doctrine. Based on human principles of chaos? Not chaos, Sarah corrected respectfully. Adaptive thinking. The ability to see beyond established patterns and find solutions where none seem to exist. She gestured to her team. The victory over the swarm wasn't just about human tactics, it was about combining the unique strengths of different species in ways no one had imagined possible. Cathor stepped forward, his scales gleaming under the chamber's lights. Before Instructor Chen arrived, I believed that power came from perfecting established forms, from following the paths that had always worked. I was wrong. True strength lies in our ability to evolve, to change, to surprise even ourselves. The council chamber erupted in murmurs as silicon interfaced with the holographic systems, displaying detailed analysis of the battle. The data is conclusive, the Arisian reported. Our success rate against simulated swarm attacks has increased by 300% since implementing human-inspired training methods. Spark's energy form pulsed with agreement. We have discovered that human unpredictability, when combined with our various natural abilities, creates combat potential far beyond our previous calculations. Commander Vexera's antennae flickered as she addressed the council. The attack on our academy proved two critical points. First, that our traditional methods had become predictable enough for our enemies to exploit. And second, that the human capacity for innovation, when properly integrated with our existing strengths, represents our best hope for future defense. The council leader's crystalline structure shifted thoughtfully. And what of the conspirators? High Administrator Tall and his accomplices. They represent an old way of thinking, Sarah replied. The belief that strength comes from dominance, from forcing everyone to follow a single path. But human history teaches us that true resilience comes from diversity, of thought, of approach, of capability. She walked to the tactical display, bringing up images of the Academy's new training programs. We're not suggesting abandoning traditional methods entirely. Instead, we're proposing an integration of approaches. Let the disciplined power of draconid combat forms merge with human adaptability. Combine Arisian precision with our talent for improvisation. Blend ethereal energy manipulation with our knack for finding unexpected applications. The images showed cadets of various species training together, each contributing their unique perspectives to solve complex challenges. This is what humans call synergy, Sarah explained. The whole becoming greater than the sum of its parts. And you believe you can formalize this approach? Another council member asked. Create a structured program from what seems inherently unstructured? Sarah smiled. That's exactly what we've already begun doing. Commander. Vexera activated another holographic display, showing the Academy's new curriculum. We're calling it the Adaptive Combat Integration Program. It maintains the core strengths of our traditional training while incorporating human-inspired elements of creative problem-solving and tactical innovation. The presentation continued, showing remarkable results from early trials. Species that had once struggled with certain aspects of combat training were now excelling by approaching challenges in new ways. Traditional weaknesses were being turned into unique advantages. The swarm will return, Sarah concluded, her voice carrying across the chamber. And they will have adapted to the tactics we use to defeat them. But that's exactly why this program is so crucial. Because next time, we'll have something new waiting for them. Not just human unpredictability, but human unpredictability multiplied by the strengths of every species in this chamber. She looked around at the assembled council members, meeting their varied forms of eyes. Humans reached the stars not because we were the strongest, or the fastest, or the most advanced. We got here because we never stopped learning, never stopped adapting, never stopped finding new ways to overcome impossible odds. Now we're offering to share that legacy with all of you. The council chambers fell silent as the members communicated among themselves through their various methods. Finally, the council leader's voice resonated through the chamber. The council has reached a decision. The Adaptive Combat Integration Program is approved for full implementation across all galactic defense facilities. Furthermore, Instructor Chin, you are hereby promoted to Director of Strategic Innovation. Sarah bowed slightly, then turned to her team, her friends, with pride. They had done more than just save the Academy. They had opened a new chapter in galactic military history, one that would combine the best of human ingenuity with the strengths of all spacefaring species. As they left the council chamber, Cathor spoke softly. What do you think the swarm will make of these changes? Sarah's eyes twinkled with that distinctly human mix of determination and mischief. I think they're about to learn why humans have a saying, the only constant is change. And we're going to make sure it's a very educational experience for them.